internet governance concerns. This is maybe just to give a bit of the overview of the whole context in which this webinar takes place. And it is related to the Geneva Internet Conference. I'm sure, or I hope that most of you are already informed about it. And Geneva Internet Conference takes place in end of November. As in order to structure the discussions about the conference well in advance, we thought of 3 different tracks that are guiding the preparations for the conference. One is overcoming the internet governance policy silos. And we had a webinar about it mid-September. The follow-up discussions are currently on in the forum within the Geneva Internet Platform website. So I encourage you to join and discuss overcoming internet governance policy silos. The second one is the topic of today, and the third one they will launch at the end of October is evidence and measurements in the internet governance. What sort of data and numbers are we talking about? When it comes to this topic today, whom do I contact if I want to raise my IG concerns? Today we are going to see what are the trends and the needs, where did the needs emerge about finding the mechanism which all of us can address if we have some concerns. After the webinar, so we'll go through a couple of slides just to map the field, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions and comments, including voice comments if any one of you is willing to. After the webinar, we will share with you and with everyone else, the link to the forum where we're going to go on discussing this topic till the conference in Geneva. So that basically during the conference in Geneva, we can sum up the inputs from various players and participants and focus as build up on the discussion. So starting with today's topic, I'm sure many of you or anyone of us who basically has contact with internet governance had a number of questions. It's not only the governments, it's also the civil society, the corporate sector. Some of those are, of course, related to the top level ones like the Snowden affairs and the PRISM surveillance program and so on. But not only on the global level, on such a geopolitical level, we're also talking about data protection. We're talking about how can we protect our personal data. After all of us are users. How can we protect our personal data in everyday work, in relation with Facebook, Google, and cloud services, in relation with the internet industry, in relation with our governments? How do we protect our e-health data and files? So there's a lot of questions where we might ask ourselves, how do we better structure or ensure that policies related to data protection on national or global level are synchronized and functional? Then we have a question of the infrastructure. We have a question of cables, not only submarine cables that you can see on the map, but also the terrestrial cables that go through the continent, interconnection, the costs of the internet as well, economic models, which economic models might be most convenient for developing countries, for developed countries, for different parts of the world. Discussions about cyber war, and cyber war is again a big geopolitical thing. It was discussed by economists and many other journals, but this is the top level discussion. But then we have issues about cybercrime, identity theft, botnets, DDoS attacks, security of critical infrastructure. So from user level to national level to global level, issues about cybercrime, cybersecurity. Who do we contact if we want to have more information about what's happening? Issues about multilingual domain names, for instance, and internationalized domain names, and how do we make sure that the internationalized domain names or new GTLDs, new domains on the internet, reflect our needs as business, our needs as or concerns as civil society, our needs or concerns as a government. How do we get the updates, what's happening over there in ICANN or wherever? Then the discussions about net neutrality and generally the same equal playground, equal field for industry, for users, for countries, between the countries, and so on. So these and many other internet governance concerns, and I'm sure you can think of many more, sometimes ask us for a phone call to inquire, to check up what's happening in privacy and data protection. What is coming from the Council of Europe? What is coming from the European Commission? What might be the best practices from governments on national level? What are the practices of NGOs, the civil society, in order to fight for privacy? So in a way, it's not only a red phone where we can ask someone how to solve our problems. Probably the decision making and policy making on national level will be very specific, but it's rather also a question of how do we acquire enough data and best practices from other parts of the world so that we don't really need to go through all the documents available on the net about each and every problem. Now, the question is, of course, who do we call? But we know that there is a number of international fora that are taking place almost simultaneously. We know about the ICANN regular meetings dealing with the domain names. We know about Internet Governance Forum, an annual meeting where a whole set of internet governance issues are discussed. We know that there are processes within the CSTD, Commission for Science, Technology and Development, within the ECOSOC about the internet governance. We know that NetMundial, of course, is going on in a form of NetMundial initiative or NetMundial platform, which we are going to probably touch upon more tomorrow during the webinar on Geneva briefings on internet governance. We know that the ITU is, of course, discussing a lot of things related to internet as well, from infrastructure to spam and even security, as we have seen during WCIT, economic models and many other things. Lastly, we have WSIS +10 process within the UN. Now we have Global Internet Policy Observatory by European Commission, Geneva Internet Platform that is hosting this series of webinars and many others. So who do we actually call? Each one of these might have pros and cons. Who do we actually call if we want to get the information on any of the concerns? And the question of one-stop shop or calling for a Batman, a person or institution that can solve all of our problems, is something that is not new. It's not new within internet governance. It's not new within other fora as well. It emerged in climate change discussions long ago. It emerged even during WSIS World Summit on Information Society in 2003 as an idea to have a system, a mechanism, which can help all of us to, in a way, get the information about specific problems or specific concerns that we have. Why is that? Developed countries usually do have capacity to visit all of these various and follow all of these various fora that we mentioned previously. Developing countries, however, might not have that power due to limited resources, limited knowledge, and access to information, and a number of other problems that developing countries are dealing with, where internet comes only more and more now, and also a number of civil society organizations, even corporate sector, does not really have the capacity to follow all these discussions. So the question is, can we have a one-stop shop where we can at least address our concerns and maybe get the information about where to go? We don't expect necessarily to have a Batman that can solve our problems. Obviously, we will have to deal with it on the national level, but at least one spot where we can actually get the information about it. This is particularly relevant for developing countries and the missions of developing countries, which are more and more, which are basically involved in the UN discussions about the internet on various levels. But the missions of developing countries, of course, have very limited capacities. One mission of a country in Geneva, for instance, might have a person who is at the same time in charge of following and reacting on climate change, energy issues, internet, culture, and many others. So it's really, really hard to focus and follow. So the question about one-stop shop is basically how do we try to provide such a mechanism that can help us get more information and tell us where to go. And if you remember this illustration of building under construction of the internet governance, you will remember a complexity of issues that are encompassing this whole discussion, from technical and infrastructure to legal, economic aspects, development aspects, social cultural aspects, and so on. Some of these issues actually got a little bit more matured. And in recent years, and even in recent months, when we were analyzing the transcripts of the speeches and discussions at the Internet Governance Forum, for instance, the Net Mundial and so on, with the text mining mechanism, we found out that there is less and less mentioning of in sense of e-health, e-commerce, and so on, because some of these things are now becoming going within the kind of a normal context discussing health. So e-health is becoming an issue being discussed under health. E-commerce more and more within the WTO. Intellectual property rights on the internet are more and more being discussed within the WIPO. So basically we are having a maturity of some issues which can now turn to existing institutions to a large extent, where the existing institutions might be able to address some of the concerns. Obviously, the link between the issues and the complexity of the issues does not really allow usually single institutions to deal with it. But for instance, we had recent case within the Human Rights Council of the UN, which addressed the issues of data protection and online privacy, including the inputs or taking into consideration inputs coming from the IGF, prepared by the civil society, set of civil society organizations. So even these models might be changing within the existing institutions. Now, obviously, the question is, for a particular concern, where exactly do we go? If we have concerns about cybercrime, should we go to Council of Europe with the Convention of Cybercrime? Should we go to Interpol when it comes to more practical issues? Should we go to ITU, which also deals with cybersecurity in a grander scale? We might like to have someone who can really channel us. There is an additional question of orphan issues, which has been discussed for a number of times, a number of years within the Internet Governance Forum, which is the issues that do not exactly belong within one single track of international institutions. Even network security might be one of those. Network security, for instance, or the internet security, cybersecurity to some extent, is a palette of different aspects, from child protection to cybercrime to behavior of states in cyberspace, including international law and humanitarian law, critical infrastructure protection, including the protection of telecommunication infrastructure, technical protection. So it really encompasses a wide palette of things. The other example of orphan issues might be net neutrality, because net neutrality also covers aspects from traffic management, which is a technical aspect, to human rights aspects and freedom of speech, to economic aspects and trade aspects, after all. Where should these orphan issues go? Lastly, some of the discussions do not necessarily need to be or can be addressed on a global level. Some of them might be needed to be addressed on a regional level. Taken as an example, multilingualism or internationalized domain names, for instance, in the Arab script. So this is something that particularly needs to be discussed within the Arab region and Arab region structures. So those are the questions that we have on how do we basically help ourselves where to search for more information or for the answer to a particular question. And then we come to something that has recently been titled or discussed as clearinghouse functions. There are other names for these kind of mechanisms. This is not a definite name, and some authors propose a title of clearinghouse, even though it has been used within the trade and economic affairs previously, financial affairs previously. And this clearinghouse functions or the functions of the clearinghouse would exactly be helping specifically governments, especially least developed countries, to access the information about the concerns they might have related to internet governance, which means preparing, gathering information, verifying information, and sharing with end users, in this case, also developing countries, governments, but not necessarily only governments. Then the observatory, meaning following on what is happening, following on the trends, monitoring on developments in internet governance, on emerging issues as well, providing analysis to a large extent, also computer-based analysis, such like text mining and discourse analysis, and following trends. So what are the trends when it comes to policies, risks, solutions? What are the best practices as well? For instance, Internet Governance Forum has been developing this set of best practices. Also, Clearinghouse might have a function of networking and support. That means not only passively providing information to the interested parties, but also somehow guiding different institutions, and again, especially governments, on where to go, who to contact, linking them to different institutions and other mechanisms that exist, helping them to get involved where necessary. So if it is a question of domain names, say, and if the right address to go is ICANN, the clearinghouse might actually help governments understand how this is being dealt within ICANN, where to search for a solution within ICANN, and how to participate in this process, and even in a way get in touch with ICANN and combine the two, or connect the two, to come forward with a joint approach for a solution of a particular problem. The other example is, of course, capacity development. The clearinghouse might actually help governments to search for a particular program, existing program, capacity building program that might suit the needs within cybersecurity area, data protection area, economic models, infrastructure, IPv6, or overall political aspects. So those are some of the functions that we see now being discussed as possible clearinghouse functions. Some authors purposely put an emphasis on what should the clearinghouse do, and underline that the functions should be critical, not the format for the moment. There is a recent paper from Willem Drake and Lea Kaspar about clearinghouse, which provides quite a good overview of possible functions and even possible structural formats or ways how the clearinghouse could be found. One particular metaphor that was used, that we developed in Diplo some months ago, I think it was early this year. There is a blog on Diplo's website about Internet Governance Restaurant. Welcome to the Internet Governance Restaurant, where we also prepared this illustration, and we try to compare what now seems to be titled as clearinghouse, possibly, as a kind of internet governance restaurant, where basically, if you want to prepare a specific menu, you have the function of the restaurant which helps you prepare the menu you like, the food you like with the ingredients you like, and channel these requests to the kitchen, where in the kitchen you might have different institutions like ICANN, WTO, WIPO, UNESCO, and the others, who might actually help you prepare a specific meal, so to speak, of national policies that you might, as a government, like to have. This is, in a way, a plastical description of what such kind of one-stop shop or clearinghouse might be doing. So the next question, of course, after that remains open. This is, how do we institutionalize the clearinghouse function, or how do we possibly build a system or a mechanism which will play a role of clearinghouse. There is a number of options, and I'm referring to a couple of options that Drake and Kaspar outlined, and those are not the only options, of course. One might be that the international organizations, basically, or intergovernmental organizations, might be charged or mandated to perform the function of a clearinghouse. We know that there is a number of existing processes currently within the ITU versus plus 10 process, the ECOSOC CSTD, that already deal with internet governance. And the question may be whether a clearinghouse mechanism that would assist the governments to know where to go and to get more information about specific topics would be somehow fit within the intergovernmental organizations. While the legitimacy of such an approach and the fact that these institutions already exist and function and are focused on some of the internet governance issues is definitely a pro, there are a couple of cons as well, or drawbacks for such a system that are noted. And this is a complexity of internet governance issues, while each or most of these existing intergovernmental organizations or international organizations do have a specific focus within internet governance. So they usually do not cover the holistic picture of internet governance. Besides, there are some speculations that the bureaucracy or the complexity of the system of United Nations and existing institutions might not fit well with the dynamic feature of internet governance, and that the lack of multi-stakeholder approach of these institutions is also something that is not desirable. So these institutions would need to come closer to multi-stakeholder way of management. The second option, or the other option, is building up a new multi-stakeholder institution, the one that does not exist yet. And that might be one option, might be a follow-up on the Net Mundial that has been discussed a lot. Within the Net Mundial, there is also, within the Net Mundial final statement, there is a call for an idea to build up something like a clearinghouse, which would do a monitoring and analysis of intergovernmental developments. Now, with the progress of Net Mundial initiative that World Economic Forum is taking over, there might be space to discuss this kind of mapping or how to set up the institution in future. There is, of course, an option of a current mixture of multi-stakeholder platforms. JIPO, ICANN, Geneva Platform, Freedom Online Coalition, OneNet, and many, many others that exist, including the mechanisms within the intergovernmental and international organizations. This kind of a mishmash might be the most practical to achieve at the moment, because it doesn't require any new form or institution, but just would require a better and more focused cooperation between these platforms, so that the governments or civil society or corporate sector that might need the service of a clearinghouse could effectively get the information from this mishmash of organizations. There are, of course, a lot of possible drawbacks. One is the functionality of such a combination of institutions, and the other one is obviously the legitimacy, because the governments, and especially governments of developing countries, mostly G77 countries, are not inclined to address the forum they are not comfortable with. They are not in a way governmental or somehow some form of governmental forums. The fourth option would be the Internet Governance Forum, which already exists. It exists as a discussion platform. It has improved in the recent years, and we've seen this year even the Best Practices Forum. In the early days of Internet Governance Forum, or before the Internet Governance Forum was operationalized during the time of a working group on Internet Governance, there were ideas that Internet Governance Forum could exactly function very similar to what we call now clearinghouse. No decision making, but yes, assistance and monitoring analyzing and advising on various areas of internet governance and helping various players to get together and find best practices on their own. Whether this is possible now, when the things have matured a little bit more, it's still to see. The mandate of the IGF should be, or is likely to be, extended for another 5 or 10 years, end of this autumn. But the format or the mandate, the details of the mandate will probably not be changed. However, there have been improvements in the IGF even without changing its mandate formally through the CSTD working group on improvements of the IGF. So there might be a way to introduce this additional level of Internet Governance Forum operational or functionality as a clearinghouse, yet the problems might be quite both practical and political. Practical problems refer to funding. Funding is something that is still very problematic with the Internet Governance Forum. It's a combined private and governmental funding. If a good funding mechanism would be set up, it might be easier, but without a good funding mechanism, there is always a risk of dominant position or monopolization of IGF by some actors, which might be a problem. IGF also has an advantage of being a legitimate UN system, which is a multi-stakeholder, which already exists. So in that sense, it has a trust. Internet Governance Secretariat is based in Geneva, which is a very useful thing for diplomatic missions of developing countries. So there are a lot of elements which might be useful, but discussions will probably go on. Some of the desired properties, and this is really a very provisional list, and I invite you, I think this is a good start to start from, and I invite you to add on what are desired properties of such a system, such a mechanism like clearinghouse. It should be legitimate so that the trust exists by all the players, not only the governments, but the others as well. It should include multi-stakeholder mechanisms. It should be dynamic so that it can be effective, because the internet governance is a fast-changing area. It should contain or be based a lot extensively on knowledge in order to be able to provide evidence-based work, not biased, but in a way focused on expertise. It should be accessible to the least developed countries primarily, but obviously to the others. It should be independent to the largest possible extent. And there are probably many other properties that we might want to see from such a system. And again, I invite you to share your views on that and add to the bullets or comment. Finalizing my part of this webinar, and then soon opening up the podium for you. What is next in our discussion about this topic? Who do I contact if I want to raise my internet governance concerns? After this, obviously, we will discuss a little bit more during this webinar. After the webinar, we will open a forum on the Geneva Internet Platform website, and we'll share with all of you in the next days, where we invite you, encourage you, and to share your views specifically about desired properties and needs that you, as a possible users of such a clearinghouse function in internet governance, might want to see or might have. And we certainly encourage you to share it through your contacts and networks, so that we can get an extensive set of comments and contributions in this discussion. We will summarize all of that within the Geneva Internet Conference on 18th and 19th of November. And you're certainly most welcome to join us at the conference as well, where we hope to have a bit clearer idea of what we can suggest to other discussions in this direction. Okay, I will stop here. I think I have exhausted the mapping part of this discussion. Now, I encourage you to open the floor for you, and I encourage you to come up with your comments about the necessity of such mechanism as well. Do you think, as someone who is involved in internet governance, that this mechanism is important? What would you expect from a clearinghouse function what would be desirable properties, and after all, maybe even institutionally where you can see it. Those of you that do not have a microphone or do not want to join us with voice, I encourage you to write your comments or questions in a text chat, and then I will go through them and read them out. Those of you that might want to join with voice, and I see Ginger has already raised hand, you can just type in the forum raise hand, or there is also an icon below the list of panelists where you can raise the hand. Up to you, and then we'll give you a floor one by one to address with the microphone. Let me give a floor now to Ginger. Ginger, I suppose you have a microphone, so you might actually connect with voice from US. Ginger, the floor is yours. Still can't hear you.
Good morning, Vlada. Good morning, everyone. It's early morning here. It's still dark here, even. So I'm glad to see all of you here to begin my day. Vlada, now you're talking very much about the clearinghouse and facilitating a way to deal with specific issues in a larger area. Maybe you said it and I missed it, but I did not hear a reference to the Ungovernance Forum, which specifically, and Milton Miller's speech, which specifically called for the internet as a decentralized organism, which kind of contradicts your proposition today. And I'm wondering what your reaction to that, to the whole concept of internet nation, for instance, in John Perry Barlow's Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. So how does that play into your idea and your excellent presentation on a clearinghouse? It seems to be a contradiction.
Thank you, Ginger. Very good point. We will address tomorrow during the Geneva Internet briefing webinar more about this kind of two-side dialogue. One about, in a way, bringing back Barlow's declaration about internet as a nation state in a way, and the national jurisdiction on the internet and this kind of a dilemma. When it comes to this particular issue about a clearinghouse or a one-stop shop, of course, it's very important to underline again that I don't have anything to do with the idea. As such, it has been discussed for 1 or 2 years backwards during the CSTD work on enhanced cooperation, and also within the other fora, including the Net Mundial. What I see is, and I think this is the key line, but you will tell me if I responded if I addressed your concern. I see a big difference between discussing the internet governance mechanisms, which might be, or we can discuss whether these should be more decentralized or centralized, and a one-stop shop which should not, and I underlined it, at least I understand it from the current discussions, it does not aim to solve internet governance problems. It aims to help governments, also others, but particularly governments, to find their way through these existing mechanisms, whether they're going to be decentralized or not, whether they're going to be more multi-stakeholder or less multi-stakeholder, regardless of the format of internet governance discussions. And that's a good question, whether it is possible to centralize internet governance discussions or not. But the clearinghouse or the one-stop shop should actually help us, to find our way through this forest of events and developments. Developments on the level of topics, where there is a complexity of topics and multidisciplinary coverage, and the complexity of processes which we have. So in that sense, and that's probably a good question for all of you, whether you think that on this list of desired properties, a property of decentralized, or rather a centralized, approach to a clearinghouse mechanism is better. And again, I underline that this is not about solving the IG problems. It is about channeling or helping us find the way to the information about a particular topic or concern, or about a particular body or institution where we can address the concerns, so that we can build our national policies in the way we want, right? But not any kind of a decision-making body or anything like that. So I see it as a totally two different components of the current internet governance discussions. Ginger, I don't know if this addresses your concern, or you have a different angle that I might have not seen.
That's very interesting, Vlada. Thank you very much. I'm now understanding that this is not meant to be an umbrella system that takes over and organizes all of the current organizations, but something very different, almost like an entry portal or a resource center that we can reach out to, which is, of course, a very valuable addition because it will help us channel our efforts and direct our efforts. I particularly like the idea of engaging governments more, because it's the more we can get governments involved, the more they can understand the needs of the whole of everyone and the work that the very, very important work they have to do. But I'm wondering if a one-stop shop then makes it, if it makes it easier for governments, is it going to make it harder for me as a civil society person? Because am I going to get lost in this myriad? If before I was getting lost in just human rights or just cybersecurity, what happens when you throw all of these issues at me? How do I overcome, how do I balance the complexity of dealing with so many issues with the advantage of being able to look at my issue from different facets and different viewpoints?
A very, very valid point. I think that these discussions that go around, well, I remind that this is still in a very early stage of discussions, and we have seen only thus far one more or less comprehensive paper that I mentioned about analyzing the clearinghouse functions, but we are seeing, or this type of approach has politically been seen within the NetMundial process, within the high-level group of ICANN, within the CSCD work. So politically, this is something that is evolving. Academically, or if we go into more details, how it should look like and what it should do, it is still an early phase of development. So it is the right moment to raise these questions as you did. Going back to the functions, so again, it should be helping us, guiding us through this dark forest of many things, both issues and processes. It should help us with providing information. It should help us with providing an observatory function, helping us note the trends and monitor the developments. It should help us link to specific institutions and processes and take part where we particularly want. Now, your concern about not only governments is very valid. When it comes to governments, obviously on the national level, the governments are those that will ultimately do decision making if it is needed. However, so in that sense, it is expected that the governments might have the biggest direct interest to, especially developing countries, to try to find their way in order not to need to go through all the documents and learn everything about privacy and data protection, for instance, but find a way of who else did what and where we can find out more. But it is very important that the civil society and corporate sector and academia and technical communities, so other stakeholders, media, be able to access the same very thing. So I personally would probably then, responding to your question, within the desired properties, add next to accessible to the LDCs, to the least developed countries, I'd probably add accessible to the NGOs, to also all the stakeholders. So it should not be only channeled to one particular group. You're also right when you say that the complexity of issues might be too hard to deal with by one single clearinghouse institution or mechanism. And Drake and Kaspar, for instance, also suggest that there might be a need to make different levels or different several clearinghouse mechanisms, clearinghouse bodies, the way you wish, where one would be more focused on, say, North Africa, the other one on South Africa, the third one on Latin America, or so kind of a regional clearinghouse models. Or there might be a need to have a specific clearinghouse model within each of the areas, whether it is cybersecurity, or it is human rights, or it is economic models and development, and so on. So that is something that is probably a very good question. And when I was thinking about it, and when I'm thinking about it, I usually try to see it in a way of how should the government on a national level, and I challenge you to share your experiences with us. If you would need to set up structures on the national level, you might have different ministries, so to speak, regulatory authorities and so on, dealing with some parts of internet governance. So the health ministry would probably be dealing also with e-health services, maybe even a bit on data protection. The telecommunication ministry would probably be dealing with infrastructure more. The media ministry and would be dealing with freedoms online and so on. But then again, you might need to have some overarching mechanism that coordinates, or not even coordinates, but shares the collects the information and shares the information across these institutions, and certainly across the other stakeholders. This is the thing that I see here, quite a complex one. What we need is a kind of an institution, or we might need, is a kind of institution that can help us exactly know what's happening in the ITU, in WIPO, in NetMundial, here and there, and be able to access this platform more clearly or deal with particular issue. But whether that is only one mechanism that should exist, or there should be a number of mechanisms which raises the complexity, that's a very, very good question. Again, I invite you to suggest additions to desired properties or pros and cons of different models that are listed here. But this is really not an extensive list of options. Ginger says, dark forest of many things. We need guides with flashlights. Then exactly. So that is something that is seems like thus far an idea of a one-stop shop or a clearinghouse. It's really, by the way, as I mentioned, clearinghouse is just the most frequent term currently used to explain this set of functions. One-stop shop is another one, but in a way, the call for titles, the call for names for such a function, such a mechanism is still open. So if you would call it a flashlight, or if you would call it, I don't know, Mirador or something like that, that's all very welcomed, and you're encouraged to suggest your ideas. Yes, Ginger. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Raise your hand or just type it within the chat window. Stephanie says, are there other stakeholder groups or organizations or NGOs, etc., who have already expressed interest in an IG clearinghouse? Back in WSIS days, the NGOs, the civil society, were basically, and during the work of the working group on internet governance, the civil society was exactly the one thinking about such a function, never in a form of clearinghouse. This is something that is quite new as a title or a more structured idea. But back then, we did have an idea, or we could hear the idea of even the IGF becoming a mechanism that could help map the field, analyze the information, share the information, facilitate these connections between institutions in a more structured way. Currently, when you come to the IGF, you're in a way left on your own. So you are there, but it's up to you to find your way to the IGF for what you need. This would exactly be a kind of, where we have it somewhere back, a phone. It would really be a phone. Now this WebEx is nice. It also helps us with a number of new gadgets. So in a way, we're talking about a phone. Which phone call we can make? Who can we call? Who can be our Batman, basically? That we can call and say, listen, we have a problem. And they don't tell us just go to the IGF, because at the IGF we might get lost. We need someone who can drag our hand and bring us somewhere. Currently, the academic community is mostly the one discussing the role of the clearinghouse. And a couple of days ago, there was an academic event by the network of research centers in Torino, in Italy, where I think almost the whole day, if not more, was devoted to some extent or following to some extent discussions about the possible clearinghouse and the next steps in that direction. So the academic community is very focused on that now. The civil society, besides what we've heard at the IGF a little bit, there was a session also during the IGF about the clearinghouse. We didn't hear much of that. So besides that, politically, we have heard it within the ICANN framework, we have heard it within the NetMundial framework, and we have heard it a little bit within the CSTD framework. So that's more or less it. But I think if we are going in this direction, and we'll see in the next months, it would be definitely fundamental that the other stakeholders, especially the NGOs, but also the corporate sector. It's interesting. The corporate sector is, in a way, seems very uninterested. It might be due to the fact that the corporate sector is mostly well organized within the International Chamber of Commerce, possibly missing, or definitely missing, some of the small, medium enterprises that might be interested to follow all of that. But the big group of corporate sector entities is organized within the International Chamber of Commerce. So it might be they don't feel such a need to get more information because they have clear structures on that. But the NGOs, to my extent, to this moment, it seems they're not yet too into all of this, but we'll see how it develops. Ginger, back to you before I forget. And then, or should I? Okay, let me read Ginger's comment first, and then Ginger, you can probably add on this. Ginger said, "Can we then find a Diplo-Jovan-like analogy of an orchestra? The clearinghouse is the whole orchestra. I go to the conductor for help. Each team is a section string, woodwinds, brass, organized with its own work and discussions, and then individual players developing quartets and trios and practicing on their own." Why not? This is another possible analogy. Now thinking loudly, the restaurant gives a different note because you basically prepare your own meal. And you have a waiter that liaises between you and the kitchen, and you say that you want a little bit more salty, but you don't want the mushrooms because you're allergic to them, and so on and so forth. And then the waiter tries to suggest to the kitchen, and then the kitchen prepares it. So in that sense, it is the function of preparing own meal in the sense of a national policy on a particular issue. But yes, to some extent, I think you're right that in the sense of a coordination, it might be also a good analogy that you approach a conductor and ask for a specific type of a music that you want to hear. Whereas I would be, again, careful not to mix the role of a conductor in sense of coordinating all the institutions, and the role of conductor as someone whom you might approach to help you hear different parts of the music. We are not talking about the clearinghouse as a conductor of the overall intergovernance process, but somehow who can actually help you hear different instruments that you want to hear. I'll put it that way. Stephanie says, in all these instances you have mentioned, Torino Symposium, IGF, Net Mundial, was there any of the four models preferred over the others? Not that I figured out. After all, this is really, these four models is just one suggestion by two authors, and we haven't seen the other suggestions. But I'm quite sure that in the next months we'll see other possible suggestions and for mechanisms. But what might be true when it comes to what Drake and Kaspar mentioned is that we might need to firstly focus on the function and desirable properties, and then move on to see the implementation of that. Ginger says, back to the restaurant, doesn't that make the dinner very passive? Well, depends. You might be very demanding and ask for different aspects. In sense of you do not prepare a dinner, probably yes. Maybe the better thing would be that the chefs in the kitchen would actually tell you the basic components of the recipe, but then you would be the one to cook the meal. That's also one of the options. Analogies are sometimes very illustrative, but can be misleading as well. Musicians is more active. No, you ask for help developing the masterpiece. Yes. So again, in sense, if you are asking someone to help you develop your own music, yes. But again, not as a conductor, not to a conductor as someone who is coordinating the work of Net Mundial, Icon, and so on. There is no such thing. This is rather someone who knows each and every instrument and each and every musician, and who can tell you which, if you want this kind of a sound, you might try to talk to this musician and see if you can enforce this sound louder and so on. Now we are really going into analogies and metaphors, but I like it in a way. It's an interesting exercise. Stephanie says, Ginger, does the orchestra analogy make the presumption that everyone is playing the same tune? That's a good question. Ginger says, back to the title of the webinar, who do I call? IGF is waiting for our inputs right now with a call for contributions on IGF 2014 towards 2015. I think it closes on 21st of October. Thank you, Ginger, for sharing that. Yes, there is a call for proposals and contributions for the IGF 2015, and also I think the reflections on the best practices forum and other developments of this year IGF. So please turn to the IGF website to contribute. I think it is the right moment to help the IGF develop further, maybe even in this direction. Why not? That's something that remains to be seen. Okay, we are about to close the for today. Let me see if we have. Okay, there are no further questions. Ginger, should I give you one last moment for a final comment, since you have been waiting eagerly to jump in once more?
Actually, Vlad, I thank you very much, but I made my comments in the text. I do really like Steph's comment. What if we're not playing the same tune? How do we get on the same page? And if we do it wrong, we're playing different and perhaps clashing themes. But if we do it right, we have harmony. So I think we do have to work on this. Great webinar. Thanks very much, Vlada.
Thank you, Ginger. Yes. Well, let's go on with the analogies because they can really help us find maybe what we really need. As we said, the discussion continues after the webinar. So we are moving to forum, and we have just pasted the link to a discussion forum on Geneva Internet Platform, a discussion forum devoted to this topic. Who do I contact if I want to raise my internet governance concerns? So please follow the link in the chat and let us know of your thoughts. I would maybe structure it in the following way. What are the particular needs that you or your institution might have when it comes to better participation and access to information about specific IG concerns, and how to find your way through this forest of internet governance developments and topics? So what are your needs? What might be the desirable functions of a thing called clearinghouse or whatever else we call it, and also suggestions on how we can call it? And thirdly, what might be the desirable properties of such a system so that we can find a way to institutionalize it, or at least come up to more suggestions. Tomorrow we have the webinar on Geneva briefings on internet governance, where we are going to look into what happened in September and what's coming in October when it comes to internet governance. We'll do a zoom out. We'll see what are the political trends. So I assume it will be quite interesting. Johan Kurbale, Director of DIPLO, will join us tomorrow as well. And lastly, the invitation to, after discussing in the forum, join us for the Geneva Internet Conference and the other tracks related to Geneva Internet Conference. The digest and the video of this webinar will be available on our web in the next few days. So if anyone missed it or wants to get back to it, you're most welcome to do and to share the information. I thank you all once again for joining, and I hope we'll see you on this topic more within the forum. Thank you and bye-bye.